Recording has started.
All right, perfect. Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead, out of respect for everybody's time, and get started with the meeting. We're going to call the meeting to order at 10:02 this morning. Like Daryl, for those of you who have just hopped on, like Daryl said, we do not do any roll calls on this meeting, so we're just asking you to sign in. He did include the link in the chat. Or you can go directly to the website and sign in. So if everybody could do that at some point today, that would be great. All right, moving on to our next item, project updates. So Tracy's not actually going to be on the call today. She's out of the office, so she did provide me some updates that I will go ahead and share with the group. Please just let me know if you have any questions as we move along. All right. We have the 3 military installations that still have not moved over to the ESInet. The first one is Shriver. Tracy said that per the Lumen field engineer, there is a site survey scheduled for early in June to work on that one. Cheyenne, they will be set up to route to El Paso. And then she did advise that Buckley is, both links are up and they are working on the ESInet. Does anybody have any questions about the 3 that we still need migrated over?
Do we have anybody from DISA or from the Shriver military base on today?
Yeah, Daryl, Kevin Brown from DISA's on.
Hi, Kevin. Do you know, so it looks like the last update we had last week from Lumen was that a site survey was scheduled for early June. Do you know if that's happened yet?
I do not know. I was kind of hoping to get status on that today, so I think we all know what we're reading here on the page. So.
Okay.
And I think as far as I know, Buckley is, I think we're complete. I think they're completely cut over unless somebody knows differently. But as far as the folks at Buckley are concerned, they're 100% good to go.
Yeah, Tracy did say that both links are up and they're functional.
Okay, so I think there's no more work to be done at Buckley. We're done there, correct?
Yep, we'll go ahead and take them off of our list, and that would be just down to the 2.
Well, that's a little victory in and of itself. So.
That's right. Progress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Anybody have any questions about those last few that I can share with Tracy?
Oh, hey, Tina, this is Wes, guys. Yeah, Nancy's having trouble coming off mute. And let me see if I can read her IM here. He committed to providing the site survey documentation by the end of, and Kevin Brown, this is for you as well. Let me read. She's typing to me. For Shriver, by the end of the week, they should have the site survey documentation complete.
Okay, that's good. So that means it's taking place this week, right?
That is correct, sir.
Yep, great. Okay. Hey, one other thing, Wes, if you could, you can just send me in an email. Do you have a technical contact an engineer at Lumen I can talk to just to kind of capture and document what was put in at the base?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Now I'll get your I'll send that to you. I can use my engineer, and we'll use another network one down at the Springs. I'll find the right guy there.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Wes.
You got it.
Thanks, Wes. I appreciate that. All right. So next item on the agenda. We had a few open tickets for migrated PSAPs. The first one that we've been kind of following up on is Adams County. Wes, do you have an update on the issues that Adams County was experiencing?
Yeah, I don't think they have. You know, at NENA in Colorado, I brought that up with Adams County, and they knew of no lingering issue at all. So I would have to, I think, safely assume, maybe that's sounds counterproductive, maybe, but that has gone away.
Okay. All right. And then the next one was Summit County. Tracy said she talked to them and that Lumen was standing by waiting for some testing to be done by Motorola and Summit. So they're kind of on hold on that one right now. Is there anybody on from Summit?
Summit, hey, Tina, Summit, I don't know if they're on or not, but they typically work directly with Motorola. They're self-maintained for the most part. So that would be between those two to arrange that. And of course, would be on standby for the results or whatever else we need to help out.
Yep, that's what Tracy said. That's where we're at right now. Is just waiting for that testing to be completed.
Okay.
And then the last one that we were kind of working on were last month we talked about the misroute issues that Lita was having. Wes, do you have an update on that?
I do, and actually I have Susan Jansen on the line too. We went through that, turned those misroutes in, and Sue Jansen and our NOC manager Carl had the results of that. And Susan, I believe, are you on the phone now? On the call?
I don't see her on the attendee list.
She is. Yeah, she's there. Susan, we can't hear you. No, there's no special code to unmute. I don't know, Daryl, I don't know what it is. We have issues with the mute unmute here. Susan, if you will dial in on the 800 number with your cell. You dialed in on a 402 number. Daryl, do you see Susan Jansen there? Is there any way you can unmute?
I don't see Susan Jansen on the people list or a 402 number for that matter.
Oh, Susan, do you hear us? Well, she's hearing me because she was. What is the 800 number? Daryl, would you read out the physical number to dial in? Hopefully she got the, I know she got the right invite. She's listening to us. Try *6, Susan, if that might work.
Hello, can anybody hear me
Hey.
now?
Bingo. Yes,
That's
we do.
beautiful. It works.
Thank you, Bruce.
Hi. Regarding the, was it Lita, the LETA PSAP?
Yes, they had
route?
they had some misroute issues, and we returned those tickets in, and we came up with a couple of different scenarios of why we could see some and not others. Would you, for the group, kind of summarize, and for Kimberly, what we see?
Based on the troubleshooting that Carl and I did, three of the Annie alleys were not, the calling numbers were not in the Annie Alley database. And the other ones appeared to be a call transfer or a 10-digit dialed number. I cannot validate which one it was, as I have no way to go back for historical data. I would have to have real-time test calls made while I'm watching all parties. But the three that I was given, to me, they're either a 10-digit dialed number, because it appears we sent a pseudo number out to the next-gen 911 platform, and that is usually from a call transfer or somebody 10-digit dialed from an admin line or a PRI, but I have no way of identifying the original source. Unless we can get some testing set up and I can add some extra traps onto the system.
Yeah, whatever we can do to help Kimberly out. I don't, Daryl, I don't know if she's on the phone or not here.
She is.
There she is. Go ahead.
Kimberly, go ahead.
So since we don't have 911 camera trunks with dialable numbers, how would somebody be reaching us with calling a direct pseudo number?
You still do have dialable numbers, unfortunately, because call transfers still take place from admin lines. So they have to send us a 10-digit number, which we in turn delete that 10-digit number out and send a pseudo number out to the next-gen platform. I do have some PSAPs that have opted to get rid of that dialable number, but it had to be signed and sealed, stating that that they could lose transfers from admin lines or PRIs or other companies that may have your number set up as a transfer.
Okay, so super confused. When we migrated over, sorry, let me turn down my radio. When we migrated over to the ESInet, we had to keep one, and we kept one dialable number per
Mhm.
PSAP, and that was for troubleshooting. We were told that was just so Intrado Lumen could get in and do some troubleshooting, but that we didn't have any dialable numbers regardless if we were transferring from 911 to 10-digit. We didn't have those SIP sessions, didn't have numbers assigned. In fact, when we were cutting, we had to provide numbers that could temporarily be assigned from our own like admin line so we could simulate phone calls in, or Intrado provided numbers in some cases so we could simulate phone calls in and specifically hit those ESInet SIP sessions.
Correct. You're right on that. And that was for a person to dial 911, so it went to the Annie Alley database. That is true for testing and pre-testing.
Okay, so these calls rang in on 911 and they were meant for Denver. So
Well-
they reached on the 911 SIP session and they reached one of our local PSAPs up here in Larimer County. It wasn't a transfer, it was an original call, it wasn't anything that somebody transferred a 10-digit into 911.
Based on the call detail records, a pseudo number was sent out to the NextGen platform, which it is not a actual dialed 911 call. Or it was a record not found, and we are telling it to go to another PSAP. The only way the NextGen platform will get a pseudo number on a dialed digit, on dialed 911, is if there's no record in the Annie Alley database, which Carl found 3 of them, or if an admin line, and there could be admin lines in other providers, other CLECs that have transferred calls from a fire station or from a hospital or medical center that has dialed this number for years and years and years. We have no way of identifying how many people out there have dialed transferred calls to a number that was in the TDM network. So we don't take them out of the network because they're still dialing these calls. We can take it out of the network, but that is up to each PSAP.
Okay, so
And
let's go.
some things have to sign, some people have to sign. And then it takes troubleshooting skills even harder, but that's up to the PSAP.
So the 3 that were no record founds,
Mhm.
that should be a default route, correct? That would default route.
Correct,
Okay, so
correct.
here's let's start with this question then. We were informed upon migrating over that for all of the PSAPs in this Denver metro corridor, including northern Colorado, that our default route was Aurora
Correct.
PD. Okay, I'm not Aurora. So how did those 3 reach Larimer County?
For the default, I honestly can't tell you. I cannot look at historical data. Unfortunately, I have to have live test calls, and I have to have traps set up to monitor everything that happens. So those originating phone numbers would have to make test calls again. And I don't know if you guys have that capability to know who was there, especially if it was a cell number that was roaming. That could come in different from a cell number that's roaming. I've also seen where Verizon has had overflows to a 10-digit number. Without having a live test call and watching the failure, I cannot pinpoint what is wrong. However, if we send a pseudo number, it's because somebody transferred it or a 10-digit number was dialed, and it may have not been for Lita. They may have dialed the Douglas County one. I cannot go back and look at that.
Right. So I guess just from a big picture perspective, we've got 2 layers here of issues that concern me a great deal. One is we would love to have local calls at default route end up at one of our local PSAPs as it was prior to the ESInet migration. That just wasn't possible. And so we were able to work with Lumen and get a little bit more of a region approach in some areas. But for Northern Colorado, it's Aurora. So it's confusing, and I understand you can't look at historical data, but it's still concerning because we were told that couldn't happen. So somehow, somewhere in the programming, default routing calls specifically for the Denver area are making it to my Larimer County PSAP. So I would think that even if you can't look at those particular calls, perhaps there's some configurations you can revisit that may help shed some light. I don't know.
So can I?
The only way a call can route to LEDA is by a specific 10-digit dial number or an incorrect database issue. And I know Carl found 3 that were incorrect database issues. I don't know if there were no record founds or pointing to the wrong MSAG. I don't know. I'd have to ask Carl what he found.
So those
But
3
the
that were
other 3,
the 3 that were
ahead.
incorrect database issues, did the database get corrected?
we would have to ask Carl if he sent that to the database.
And I saw Richard Johnston trying to chime in as well. Richard, do you have anything to add?
Well, and you can keep me in line, Lumen, but there are certain things outside of Lumen's control. And what I mean by that is the originating service provider is responsible to put a call on a certain trunk to come into the system. If that originating service provider took a call and put it on a trunk group that's designated to default route to you when they shouldn't have, if there's no ANI, then it's going to default route based on the incoming trunk group that it came on. So I guess let me clarify. The originating service provider is responsible for putting it on the correct trunk group for when it comes into our system. So this could be something outside of Lumen's control. If, let's say, I'm a little CLEC that I serve you, Kimberly, and I serve Denver. And I have trunk groups for you, and I have trunk groups for Denver. But if I send a Denver call down your trunk group, if there's no ANI involved, it's going to fall back to the default route for that specific trunk group, and then it goes to you, if that makes sense. So there is still a responsibility of the originating service provider to put it on the correct trunk group coming into the system. And if there's no ANI involved there, then it's going to fall back to that default trunk group. That's outside of Lumen's control. So I think that's something that could be looked at as well, as who was the originating service provider for those calls, and are they designating the correct trunk group for those calls? Because if the ANI's in there, everything's going to work right, because then it looks towards the ANI, it looks towards the ESN for that ANI, and it gets it to the right place. But if the ANI's incorrect, then it falls back to that incoming trunk group default. And if they're putting it on the wrong incoming trunk group, we can't control that, because we can only control what that trunk group defaults to. They need to, redesignate what the proper trunk group is for that calling number. Does that make sense?
To Sue, it does. That's perfectly correct. It all depends on what incoming ES trunk group the call comes in on as to how it default routes as well. So,
Joseph, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, so I have a question as to what Lumen sees when they're coming into the trunk group. Do they have anything to kick out, things that might be put on the wrong trunk group or not have an ANI, so they can identify those originating providers that Lumen may need to contact and make sure they're doing things correctly. And there was also discussion of putting traps on lines that would allow you to see what was going on. And is there a cost to that? What does that involve? Is that something that makes sense to make sure we're troubleshooting these issues correctly?
Kimberly, are you still having issues, or have you had any reported since our last call?
We haven't. And what's interesting is on our last call, we were having a 911 outage in the Loveland CO, and that's when we got several of these default routes from the Denver metro area. So it was really concerning. And I can't wrap my head around what we were told, how the network was configured, and then the behavior of what we're seeing in these situations. So we're not having it frequently, but until we kind of get our arms around all of this, I agree. I think we need some troubleshooting measures in place, or some ability to look at the database closer. I'm not sure.
Susan or Wes, is it possible, like Kimberly asked, to revisit whether local default routing is possible?
So,
It has to be on the incoming ES trunk group, but Loveland, if Loveland has a split rate center and or remotes, which I don't know offhand, I'd have to research. That incoming call could go to 5 different PSAPs. So depending on who the originating NPA NXX is, it'll route 911 accordingly to the NELA database. However, they use one trunk group from Loveland into the selective router, and we can only supply one default ESN from all of those NPA NXXs coming in from Loveland, unless they have a specific one for each remote, which I don't know at this point what Loveland has going on. At this point, they could default route. I have to go in and look at the switch. The incoming Loveland trunk group default routes to, let me look in Denver and look. Denver. So what he said about the incoming ES trunk group, it plays a big part in default routing. Denver, Capitol. Do you have anything to add, Wes, while I'm looking this up?
Wes, are you still there?
Yeah, I am listening.
Yeah, I didn't know if you had anything to add to that while I'm
No, I
looking up
don't.
Denver Capitol.
No, I defer to your greater technical expertise and understanding here.
So Wes, I might be overstepping here, but let's try it. For those 3 particular calls, I think it can be tracked down to see which incoming trunk group it came in on. And Sue, question for you is, can we tell because of the incoming trunk group what carrier it is? Also?
What do you mean by carrier? Do you mean OSP,
Yes,
CLEC?
originating service provider, yeah.
If we can identify the trunk group, yes, but that may be a little bit more difficult without live calls. 911 goes to.
Yeah, Rich, I think it's that
Right.
there's a going back in history issue with.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the troubleshooting mechanism, I think, from a Lumen perspective. Obviously, if the call is being sent in on the wrong incoming trunk group, that's something outside of Lumen's control. But if we could designate what the originating service provider is, we could refer it back to them saying, hey, we think you're sending, LEDA calls down a Denver trunk group. And you need to look at how your call routing is set up from your switch. Again, if we get an alley failure, we're going to fall back to the default route for that specific trunk group. We can't control that. But if we can determine the originating service provider, we could refer it back to them to say, hey, take a look at your configurations and make sure you're sending the right calls down the right trunk groups.
Okay, I think that's a good start. Susan, is that something that you can look into and then share?
I'd have to go search one by one. You'd have to provide me a list. I'm not in the 911 knock center, so I do not get troubles. Do not get access to their tickets. You would have to send me a separate email with what you want me to look at.
Okay, Wes, who would be the appropriate person to look at these then?
Well, go ahead and send them to Tim Kunkelman and me, and Susan, we'll send that back over to Carl, who worked with us. That's the best bet to send that to, correct?
Yeah, but I can tell you any call that comes in from Loveland will only default to the Loveland PD. If it came in, dialed 911 on that particular trunk group. That doesn't mean that that's the only default PSAP there is. I mean, that's the default PSAP against that incoming trunk group. But if they have different NPA annexes in the database, it'll route differently.
Kimberly, did you have something you wanted to share?
I am just so confused from everything else that we have learned up to this point in how the ESInet and how default routing works. In fact, we had significant problems with this as we were cutting over PSAPs, and appreciated Aurora taking that on for the state, and then able to do a project that we worked with Cindy and Vicky on to then have default routing locally. That way the Western Slope default routes weren't making their way to Aurora. So we're able to do a little bit of that, but I say locally, it's more like a region, except for Northern Colorado. We weren't able to do anything different up here. And even during our fire in 2020, our large fires, we had calls that default routed down to Aurora. So I'm just confused on the information I received today. I understand it's the information you guys have today, but please know that from a 911 community perspective, this is very different than everything we learned from 2019 to now. So I don't know if we can fold in Cindy to the conversations because she walked with us through all of that. I know Vicky's on the call, but with audio issues, she even did some research on some additional issues we had as it related to calls routing as an initial delivery to our PSAPs, because it was something in a code with the carriers that needed to be changed on Intrado's side with the carriers. So again, this default routing conversation it's pretty frustrating.
Well, so why don't we have a side meeting on it, Kimberly? I don't think it changes the whole methodology of what's happened over the last 3 years. We're looking at 3 individual calls that didn't have an ANA associated to them and how and why they defaulted to your PSAP. So I want to get to the bottom of it. I want everyone to be comfortable with it, but we have System Live up and running for years now. So I do want to identify, is this a one-off type of scenario where the carrier may have sent a call down the wrong trunk group, or if it's a bigger issue. My guess is it's the former. So I don't want to sound all the alarms, but I want to get you your answer. So Wes, can we set up something separately rather than have something focusing on Kimberly and her concerns versus waiting another month for this call?
Glad to do that. I will do that.
Okay, Wes, just let us know what you need for that so we can help.
Will do.
Matt, I saw you had your hand up. Go ahead.
So I've been listening to this conversation and sort of empathizing with Kimberly's frustration. And, maybe it's good to work offline with Kimberly and Lita to sort out these specific issues, but this is a really big change from what we were told how things work. And I think it would be appropriate for Lumen and Intrado to come back at a future meeting with a clarifying discussion and or presentation so that the rest of us can also get up to speed on the reality of how things actually are. I'm sitting here thinking that whole corridor that used to be under those original selective router pair up there as aggregation points today was all supposed to route to Aurora. If the ESInet has the call and it default routes, it's supposed to go to Aurora. And I think that the rest of us around the state should maybe be a little concerned about how things are in other regions of the state under what are now aggregation points instead of legacy selective routers.
This is Daryl. That was my understanding as well. This is the first I've heard of default routing being based on ES trunks. And I kind of wonder if this goes back to I know there were several PSAPs on the Western Slope that were trying to get some default routing because they were having MLTS calls route to Aurora that shouldn't have. And I wonder if this was part of that fix that was developed for them and it affected the rest of the state. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with a solution here. Has it always been like this? That question is for Lumen and Intrado. Has ES trunk default routing always been the case?
Correct. This is Sue. It happened. Every end office had a default route closest to their area, whether it was a remote that was way out there, 100 miles away, however far the remotes can be. They would go to the remote would have a special trunk group that would default route to a emergency center closest to them. the host could have another trunk group going to a different place next to them, like Loveland would go to Loveland PD. Those are still in play. Those are not taken out of the equation when Next Gen 911 is provided until the selective routers are taken out of play. The selective routers are still in place today doing database dips, receiving incoming 911 calls. They do a dip, and they base their routing on that incoming ES trunk group if the MSAG database is incorrect. So there's two separate issues here. You've got the incoming side, or the end office to the selective router side does one set of work. The selective router to the next gen platform in Toronto does a whole nother set of work.
So I guess this goes back to Rich. This really isn't a LEDA one-off, and maybe we have 3 calls, 6 calls that had an issue. I get that. What our concern is, and my concern, and I think I do share concerns across the 911 folks represented today, is that what is being stated from Lumen and Intrado is different than what was being stated, described, configured, deployed to our understanding for the ESInet. So I'm not trying to say that things aren't working the way designed. It's just we have a problem. We're trying to understand what happened, and then how it's being described, how everything works is very different than what we were told before. And various sub projects, as Matt alluded to, that we did during the ESInet deployment. So that's why when we're getting default routes, no record found, calls delivered to us, that just shouldn't happen from what was described before. So I'm fine if you guys want to have a one-off with us and talk about our specific concern, but this really is a big picture conversation for all of us to understand, because this isn't so much of a LEDA issue. Maybe we were impacted by these 3 calls, 6 calls, but it's really a big picture issue to how you're explaining default routing can work.
Sure.
And what I just heard you say, Sue, is it kind of ties back into how we got all sorts of default route issues during that 4 days that we were down, and we had a local CEO office issue, and we lost 911 in the Loveland area. So it kind of is another layer now to the onion that we need to kind of peel back and understand what's going on, because it was very confusing, again, from an ESInet deployment perspective.
Here's what I would suggest, getting a document of understanding together. And I apologize, I wasn't part of the initial discussion, so I don't know what was said a year or 2 or 3 years ago during the deployment. But I think we need to all get on the same page so we can refer to documentation or a presentation or something to say this is how it does work, and here are the different scenarios. So Wes, I would suggest let's figure out a team to put that document of understanding together and present to the folks, so everybody's on the same page as to how calls come in, what the default scenarios are. There are different deals, if it comes in from a carrier to a selective router, or if it's a default based on an ESInet, scenario. So I think putting a document of understanding together of how it works, and then we can have a discussion of how that differs, or is there a concern if it differs from what was originally communicated during the implementation?
That would be outstanding.
I've already got it identified, Rich, and loop you and Susan and Cindy Berry, Carl, and the engineers in. We'll have a call and work towards getting this addressed.
Yeah, I think obviously I think everyone wants to be transparent. Everybody wants to be on the same page here. So when something does happen, it makes sense to everybody, versus maybe a miscommunication or misunderstanding of how something was deployed. So let's all get on the same page to how it works, and then we can go down from there if changes are need to be made or understandings are need to be modified. But let's get a foundation of this is how it works in today's infrastructure. Does that make sense, Kimberly? I feel like that at least it'll get us a first step, and then we can say, well, I don't want it to work that way. Can we make it work somewhere else? Some way else?
Yeah, so that aligns with a request that LEDA has already formally submitted to Lumen based on the outage we had that impacted the Loveland area, because language was used during that outage call working with the Lumen tech of diable 911 trunks. And to correct the 911 issue, they busied out our landline trunks. And that was, again, having diable numbers and busying out trunks is legacy language. And that was very confusing to us. So we did in the formal, and I say formal, I put that in air quotes because it's a subcommittee of a subcommittee, but in the outage committee, we've asked Lumen to provide that. So this would align exactly with that request that we made, and that Tim Kunkelman should be fielding, and we're just waiting for a date and time. So we were going to run through our specific one, and then we do believe it would be good for whatever we learn from a ESInet design perspective to bring it back to this group. The other reason why it's important is what you've already alluded to. We need to know the language, the terminology, the design, so we can build our contingency plans, our processes, our steps around how the network is designed. And we can't effectively do that if we don't quite understand.
Fairly stated.
Yeah.
Agreed.
That sounds like a good first step. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Wes. Thanks, Rich. All right, moving on to, does anybody have any PSAPs or authorities have any questions or have any tickets they think should be open that I can pass on to Tracy?
This is Daryl. Just a couple things on the last discussion. I would suggest too that if we have this document of understanding and that's going to be presented to the ESInet users group, we might consider doing a separate meeting just for that, so that it's not rushed and has to fit into this 1 hour schedule. So just something to think about for when that gets put together. The other thing on PSAP issues, we do have this issue tracker, and there's a lot more issues than just those 3 that are listed on the agenda. I don't know how many of these have been resolved already, but the status listed on them is open. So I don't know if there are any others on this list that we need to address today. And if any of them are resolved, it might be good to go ahead and get those marked as resolved on the tracker so that we don't have those as ongoing open items.
Daryl, do you want me to work with Tracy when she's back to get that cleaned up, and then we can, because I don't know, she just gave me the updates on those on Adams Summit and Lita. So I can work with Tracy on getting that cleaned up for the next meeting if that's acceptable.
That works for me. I don't know about anybody else.
Does anybody have any objections to that? Okay, I'll make sure that we get that cleaned up, and then we'll just make sure moving forward that we touch base on all of the open ones. Daryl, did you have anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. We'll go ahead and move on to old business. The proposed tariff amendment for ECATs. Tim or Wes, do you have an update on that?
Tim's got that now. He was getting an update on the ECATs that had to go through the gauntlet of his pricing scenario, and then incorporate as well, because he wants to submit a revised amendment for everybody to take a look at that also includes the text messaging. So that is something that Tim should be, I hope, putting forth here the next several weeks. That's in his wheelhouse right now.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll be looking forward to that. Joseph and Kathy, I see your messages, and I will confirm with the PSAPs before I have Tracy close them. Wes, do you have an update on text?
Oh, same thing. I thought I mentioned that just now. The text is something that Tim is also handling to be a combined amendment, that he's going to do the text and the ECATs in the same time.
Okay, sorry about that. Spatial call routing. An update on that?
Yes. Actually, Entrado is, for all that attended their summit, that was, man, I guess that was about a month ago or so. They're going to be doing a gap analysis for all the PSAPs that were in attendance there. That was the commitment for those parties that were at that meeting. And that is just starting to get underway. I don't have an ETA we'll be following up with our team members over at Entrada to see how long that will take for each of those PSAPs.
Okay. Thanks, Wes. Does anybody on the call have any questions about the tariff amendment for ECATs, text to 911, or spatial call routing? Matt, go ahead.
Did everybody fill out the GIS data gap analysis surveys that the GIS committee sent out? If you haven't, you should still be able to go submit that response. There's two separate surveys. There's one that is for 911 stakeholders, PSAPs and authorities. And there's another version that is for GIS folks. So say your local government GIS department that's supporting you, for example. If you haven't filled it out, please do so and soon so that we can start compiling the results of those surveys. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And it looks like Daryl put the link to the surveys in the chat if there's anybody on the call that hasn't filled those out yet.
Thanks, Daryl.
All right. Tracy did not have an update on the area code overlay. She didn't have anything to provide on that. The PSAPs that are still on 8-digit dialing, she said Huerfano County, DIA, and Shriver Air Force Base are still on 8. And then Fremont and Durango, who are managed by Converge 1, are also still on 8. So she said they would be working on getting those taken care of and having those conversations. Does anybody have any questions about the area code overlay that's coming or the 8-digit dialing that I can share with Tracy?
This is Daryl. Not a question, but a comment. I've heard from 2 different PSAPs in southern Colorado that have had issues recently with wireless calls from specific carriers not coming in to their admin lines anymore. It doesn't affect 911, but they're not able. People who are using those carriers were unable to call their admin lines. I don't have any proof as to what's causing that, but my suspicion is that it has to do with the carriers preparing for the new area code and not getting something translated properly. It is not a basic emergency service issue, but if you have any of those issues at your PSAPs, let me know, and I can potentially get you in trouble with the get you in contact with the right people to deal with that trouble. And Bruce asking if it has to do with implementation of stir shake, and that might also be a possibility. But at any rate, to get those resolved, you'll have to contact those wireless carriers directly. So I can potentially help you with trouble contacts for that.
Great, thanks, Daryl. Anybody else have any questions or comments on those items? Okay, the next is the Alley Hardware update. Tracy just said that these are continuing to be scheduled. Some started yesterday with Entrado, the PSAP, and Lumen, and they plan to finish by the end of June. Does anybody have any questions about that for Tracy? Okay, on to new business. Daryl wanted us to add the T-Mobile geospatial routing request. Daryl, go ahead.
Sure. So as everyone should be aware of by now, AT&T made an announcement that they're doing geospatial routing of all of their 911 calls. They're rolling it out a few states at a time. Colorado was in the first group. And when that news came out, I was reminded that T-Mobile actually made a similar announcement several years ago, but their request was opt-in. I think we actually talked about this at the last ESInet users group meeting, or maybe it was a different meeting where Denver 911 stated that they had been working with T-Mobile specifically regarding a tower that is on the border of their jurisdiction with another PSAP, and had then since looked into getting geospatial routing for T-Mobile turned on for the entire district. Someone suggested to me at the NINA APCO conference last month that maybe we could do a statewide request. if that was something that the ESInet users group, I think, which is probably the best representative group to be talking about this, if we wanted to make a request to T-Mobile so that they would turn it on statewide instead of having to be done PSAP by PSAP. So I wanted to open that up for discussion and see if people thought that was a good idea, whether we, how we could approach that, whether we would need to get, some sort of signed off buy-in from every PSAP in the state before we make this request on their behalf. I wanted to see what we thought the logistics of that would be, and if this is something that we should pursue. Does anybody have any thoughts as to whether this is even something the ESInet users group should be looking into to start with?
Hi, Daryl. This is Kimberly. I say yes. I mean, I think that geospatial routing, how it's going to come into the network, I mean, all of the pieces, it's just, I think it's critically important that we understand, and it goes back to network design. So I think there's a value for this committee to be engaged.
Right. I think my only concern was that, right now it's PSAP by PSAP. So if we are requesting it statewide, are we essentially speaking for those PSAPs? But that, to me, that is why we have the structure of the ESInet users group the way it is, where every governing body has a vote. So, this may be something that gets put to a vote, and then we submit a formal request to T-Mobile to turn it on statewide.
Daryl, I'm good with that. I think, like Kimberly said, it is something that each PSAP can be responsible for, but ultimately it's about the level of service we can provide the entire state. So do you think we should put together a survey for the voting members, or what do you want to do first?
Well, since this is the first time the topic is being broached, I don't want to ask for a vote today, but maybe if people think about it between the next this meeting and the next meeting, also maybe we can put together a draft letter to T-Mobile requesting it statewide, and that's what could be voted on at the next meeting.
Okay, Laura, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, hi everybody. This is Laura from Westminster PD. What are the downsides to doing that? Just out of curiosity, I don't see a downside.
So when I asked, so I actually talked to a T-Mobile representative at the national level as to why they were doing it PSAP by PSAP, and the reasons didn't make any sense to me. They said that some jurisdictions prefer not to have geospatial routing until they can have it for all carriers. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think if you can get it turned on carrier by carrier, that's better than not having it at all. And then some of them said that they wanted to decide when to turn on geospatial routing based on their strategic next generation 911 plan, which, again, this doesn't really affect anything else in the next gen 911 network, because all of this geospatial routing on the carrier side takes place before it even reaches the network.
Mhm.
So I don't have any good downsides to include, other than, the only other downside is that this will prompt T-Mobile to contact PSAPs that have cell towers that span more than one PSAP service area, and maybe work out with them exactly, how they want those calls routed. But that's a coordination issue after the request is made that would have to take place.
And Daryl, just from my perspective, I don't know if that changes, to be honest. If my guess, I don't know how their technology works. But if it works like ours do, if you can't get a GIS fix fast enough, then you just fall back to the normal cell site and sector routing. So as long as, the boundaries they are using for geospatial routing are acceptable, I don't see any downside to this thing at all, because it's just, it'll plot within the PSAP and they'll send it there, or plot within a different PSAP and they'll send it there, or it won't have a good enough fix to plot, and it'll fall back to what they've been doing for years.
Well, and part of the coordination issue, as he described it to me, was if a one PSAP wants to have it, then they need to contact the neighboring PSAP to make sure that they're okay with those calls going to the other PSAP if they're geospatially routed. But if we're requesting it statewide, I think, you know, except for the PSAPs that have service areas that border other states, I think that issue probably goes away.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess it's more expectations there. I mean, if that call plots within PSAP A, they should get it. But
Right.
if PSAP B expects to get that, then yeah, I guess their call volume would possibly go down, and they might be curious as to why they're not getting those calls anymore. I get it.
Right.
Makes sense.
Matt, I see you have your hand up.
Our 3 911 authorities here support doing the statewide approach, and I'm pretty sure our regional PSAP will support that as well. Wesco. Mandy, are you still there?
I am. Yeah, I'm in support of a statewide deployment. But you know, being on the western slope, we don't have as many overlaps and jurisdictional boundary issues that they have on the Front Range.
So we've had these ESInet users group meetings for over a year now. We've never had to have a formal vote on anything, but I think a vote would probably be appropriate before moving forward with something like this. But what I can do is I can put together a draft letter to T-Mobile requesting deployment statewide, and send that out prior to our meeting in July. And if the group decides to go this direction, we could just hold a vote at that meeting, or if people prefer, we can send a request for a vote out by email to all of the authority boards, since every authority board is a voting member of the ESInet users group.
Maybe do it just for fun to talk about, to address Mandy's comment. I agree. There's a lot less boundaries out there. But also, in Mandy, in your area, those towers cover a much greater area, right? They're big towers that span a large amount of area. So are the percentages more likely for you that, you know, a certain cell sector of a certain tower may cover multiple PSAPs? Maybe, because those towers are so have so much power and cover such a great amount of distance. The ones in the eastern side, you have a lot more towers that cover a lot shorter distance that may be wholly owned by one PSAP. So it's a funny conversation to have, because you can look at it from multiple perspectives. Does that make sense? I guess not making sense makes sense.
No, Richard, I believe you're correct. This is Mandy, by the way. You're correct in that those towers do have a larger geographic footprint. However, our geographic footprint for jurisdictional boundaries just
Also large.
it's I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just, I think, you know, every PSAP, every jurisdiction has its own unique constraints, and but I also think that when you're talking about expectation of call routing from the citizen perspective, frankly, they don't care if they're in Denver or on the Western Slope. They want
Right.
to feel that confidence that if they were to dial 911 from their wireless device, they would get to the proper agency. And, you know, folks in the Front Range might be more accustomed to having to be transferred, whereas folks over here on the Western Slope, I've come to learn that is, you know, a very perplexing thought to them.
Right. Well, and I think maybe it's a thought for this team is, when we move forward with GIS routing from an ESInet perspective, this is going to happen. So we're going to do GIS routing from our side.
Mhm.
So it's just a lead into that. Now we have, I think we talked about it on the last call, we have more capabilities, more policy routing functions, and we can use that GIS information. We can use it much more in depth to make additional routing decisions, but it's coming. So, you know, leading into it, to have a carrier do it prior to entering the ESInet, I think is a good discussion. But when we get on GIS routing for the ESInet, we will do it.
All right, thanks for that information, Rich. Daryl, if you need help with that letter, let me know, and then we'll make sure it's on the agenda for next month.
Sounds good. I think the only thing I need some direction on is, are we going to have a vote on the next call based on that letter, that draft letter that I send out to everyone? Or do you think, because this is the first vote we've ever had for the ESInet users group, that it should be a vote done by email, so that those who don't always participate on these calls will still have an ability to register their opinion.
Can we just give them a heads up and send the letter out beforehand and tell them that we will be doing a vote on the call?
That works for me.
And then we don't have the administrative work of the email and keeping track of it and stuff.
And it might spur more participation in these calls.
Yep, that would be great too. All right, thanks, Daryl. All right, on to our last couple items. The next one is questions from PSAPs or authorities to Lumen. Does anybody on the call have anything about ESInet or projects? This is your time to address those concerns. Okay, hearing nothing in the reverse of that. Lumen, anything for PSAPs or authorities?
This is Wes. No, Tina, not at this time.
Okay, great, thank you. And then on to public comment. Is there anyone on the call that is a non-voting member? This is your time to provide anything for us to consider. Any questions? All right, seeing there's none there. Thank you everybody much for joining us today. We are adjourned at 10:59. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.